Hello flight simmers, and welcome back to Alpha Hotel Flight Simulator Training. This will be lesson 2 in our VFR or private pilot level flight training. In the first lesson, we performed a normal takeoff and got familiar with some of the basic maneuvers in the 152. In the next 3 lessons, we'll be doing some more advanced maneuvers to get you more comfortable with the handling of the 152 throughout its flight envelope before we move on to landings. Today's lesson will focus on steep turns. So what is a steep turn, and why do we perform them? The maneuver is a 360-degree turn, or a full circle, completed at 45 degrees of bank. In order to set 45 degrees of bank, initially you'll want to use your attitude indicator. 45 degrees is located halfway between the two larger tick marks, the first two larger tick marks, the first one indicating 30 degrees and the second one indicating 60 degrees. Some airplanes have a dot in the middle of these two to indicate 45 degrees, but the 152 doesn't, so we're going to have to wing it. Once you've set your bank on your attitude indicator, you'll want to go ahead and look outside, since this is a visual maneuver, and take a look at the sight picture and try to maintain the bank using mostly your sight picture, although you do want to keep your instruments in your scan. So why do we perform this maneuver? Well, it is kind of fun to bank the airplane at angles that make non-pilots a little nervous, but we are actually trying to hone several legitimate skills while practicing this maneuver. First of all, we're learning to control the aircraft when it's banked beyond 30 degrees, or when it has the overbanking tendency. You'll recall from our previous lessons that when we bank beyond 30 degrees, most aircraft have a tendency to continue to keep rolling, so we're learning to control that tendency. Second, we're learning more precise control of our pitch. In order to maintain altitude in this maneuver, we need to make very small changes in pitch. So by practicing this maneuver, we practice that precise control of pitch. Third, we're learning more precise control of power. In order to maintain speed in this maneuver, you need to increase your power by about 100 RPM as you enter the maneuver, and then control the speed with very small changes in power. So we're practicing that control as well. And finally, we're learning to develop coordination between roll, pitch, and power, as entering and flying the maneuver requires that we coordinate all three throughout the maneuver. Before we begin the maneuver, we want to do a few things to set up for the maneuver. First, we wanted to enter the maneuver from straight and level flight, and we want to be at an altitude at or above 1,500 feet AGL. We'll use 3,500 MSL for the demonstration, and I recommend doing the maneuver at or above 3,000 feet MSL when you practice it on your own. We'll talk about, when we do the flight setup, about how to get up to that altitude. Obviously, you can just take off and climb up to that altitude. If you want to save some time, you can slew up to that altitude. And we can also get ourselves set up at 3,500 feet and save a flight, and we can save that for all of the air work we'll be doing over the next 3 lessons or so. You want your airspeed at or below maneuver speed of 104 knots, and we'll use our cruise airspeed of 95 knots. And you want to enter the maneuver from a cardinal heading, or at least I recommend that you enter the maneuver from a cardinal heading, north, south, east, or west. That just makes it easier to see where you're going to roll out. All right, let's talk about the procedure for performing the maneuver. The first 3 steps are going to happen pretty much simultaneously. You're going to smoothly roll into a 45-degree banked turn. It should take you about a 3 count to get from wings level to a 45-degree bank. And like most turns in Flight Simulator, we do not need to use rudder in Flight Simulator necessarily to make this turn. You're going to increase the back pressure a little bit to hold your altitude, and you can trim if you'd like to hold this back pressure. Just remember though, if you do trim at the beginning of the maneuver, you're going to have to undo that trim at the end of the maneuver. Some people like to do it, some people don't. It's personal preference, so just try it and see which way you like better. You're going to need to increase your power approximately 100 RPM to about 2,400 RPM to maintain your speed. Once you're in the turn, you're going to control your altitude with pitch, very small corrections in pitch, and control your speed with your power, very small corrections in power setting. Just like a normal turn, we're going to lead the rollout by about half the angle of a bank, but since we're doing 45 degrees, that's about 22 degrees now. And no, I can't see 2 degrees on a Cessna 152 head indicator any better than anybody else, so just know that at slightly more than 20 degrees is where you want to start your rollout. The last 3 steps happen pretty much simultaneously, just like the entry. We'll smoothly roll out onto the entry heading, again about a 3 count to get from 45 back to wings level. We'll apply the forward pressure as we gain that vertical lift back to hold our added altitude. And again, if you trimmed at the beginning of the maneuver, you're going to want to undo that trim at this time. And then reduce the power about 100 RPMs to about 2300 RPMs to get back to your normal cruise power, and then recover to straight and level flight at 95 knots. So as far as setup for the lesson goes, it'll be pretty much the same as the last lesson. Still with the Cessna 152. Weight and balance, you still want 2 full tanks of gas and 270-pound people on the airplane. For the flight conditions, you still want the clear skies theme. You want a June day at about noon for the sunlight. You want your temperature about 25 C and the pressure the standard of 10, 13, 25 and no wind. As far as getting up in the air and getting into position for doing the maneuver, you've got a couple options on that this time. First, you can set yourself up for a departure off of runway 18 and Pine Bluff and just practice your normal takeoff and climb and level off. And then once your level stabilized at 3,500 feet, we can go into the maneuver. The other option is to slew yourself up to 3,500 feet. If you're going to do that, make sure and go ahead and go through your before takeoff checklist, get everything set like you would want it for takeoff, but then go through your after takeoff checklist as well to get it set up for cruise. So basically get the flaps up and the landing lights off. And then you can slew yourself up to 3,500 feet. And once you get up to 3,500 feet, give yourself just a little bit of forward translation there so that when you let the airplane go, it doesn't release at 0 knots of airspeed, which will put you in a stall. And then just give yourself a couple minutes to get yourself stabilized at straight and level flight at 3,500 feet. And one last little setup technique that we can use. This lesson and the next 3 lessons are going to all be focused on air work, which we'll be conducting at 3,500 feet. And so if we want to make a save file for practicing our air work, we can do that once we get stabilized and straight and level flight at 3,500 feet. So once you're all stabilized, go ahead and hit your P key to pause. Go down to the load save key, or the load save option down there, and go to save. And then it'll bring up your folders that your save flights are in. And I'm going to call this one Alpha Hotel C152 Airwork. And that'll save that flight so that anytime we want to go out and do airwork, and if we don't want to practice a takeoff, then we can just pop in that save file and we'll be all set up for airwork. And the only thing to remember about that is that if you load from a saved file, you're not going to be able to manipulate the time or the weather. All right, so we'll run through our pre-maneuver list real quick. We are stabilized in straight and level flight. We're at or above 1,500 AGL. Again, we're using 3,500 AGL to do the maneuver. We're at about 95 knots, just a little bit above that, but we're well below maneuver speed of 104 knots. And we're entering the maneuver from the cardinal heading of about 180 degrees. So we're ready to do a demonstration of a steep turn. All right, so we're going to try the first turn around to the left here. So I'm going to go ahead and roll smoothly into 45 degrees at bank, pitch back just a little bit, add just a little bit of power. I'm going to control my altitude with my pitch, airspeed with my power. Keep that pitch nice and steady, and I'm looking for about 20 degrees prior to my entry heading to make that roll out. So you found a pitch here that's keeping us pretty straight level there. There's the 20 degrees, so I smoothly roll out, hold that forward pressure, and I reduce the power as I roll out. And there I am, 3,500 feet, 180 heading and 95 knots, just like I started out. Hold the power just a little bit too far as I exited the maneuver there, but we're well within standards. And you want to practice these in both directions, so let's go ahead and try one around to the right. So we'll go ahead and roll smoothly into to 45-degree bank to the right. Bring that power in just a little bit there, and then hold that pitch, that back pressure to keep our altitude. Banking a little too much there, so I'm going to ease out the bank just a little bit. Don't forget to keep that back pressure in there. And again, looking for that 20 degrees to start the rollout. There it is. So I'll do a smooth rollout. And don't forget to bring that power out. And there's a steep turnaround to the right. If you want to try a more advanced version of this maneuver, you can do back-to-back steep turns in opposite directions. Do one turn to the left and then roll right into a turn to the right. Technique for this maneuver is as you are rolling through level, you want to bring the power back to cruise RPM momentarily and apply a little forward pressure, and then as you're rolling back into the turn in the opposite direction, bring the power back in and increase that back pressure a little bit. You can consider yourself proficient at this maneuver once you can hold the bank angle in the turn at 45 degrees, plus or minus 5 degrees, hold the altitude during entry, maneuver, and rollout, plus or minus 100 feet, hold the airspeed during the entry, maneuver, and rollout, plus or minus 10 knots, and roll out on the entry heading, plus or minus 10 degrees. Now this maneuver, you don't have to necessarily practice up to proficiency standards before you move on to the next set of lessons. You can go on and move to those lessons and then come back and practice this maneuver if you're having difficulties mastering it. Once you get landings down, you do want to come back and make sure that you practice it until you're pretty comfortable with it and flying it to proficiency standards. This maneuver, along with slow flight, stall recovery, takeoffs, and landings, is part of the basic repertoire that you'll want to perform in just about any airplane that you get checked out in to get comfortable with that airplane. So that completes our lesson on steep turns. In the next lesson, we'll move on to flying at the lower end of the airspeed indicator, getting comfortable with flight at approach speeds and slow flight. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.